Thanks very much, Patrick. So that's the end of our sort of formal presentations, but we have left time for a panel discussion. So if I could ask all the speakers to come up to the front, and you can grill them. And I think Lucy and Benjamin are going to go around and collect the survey forms and the quizzes, because there's a valuable prize to be won. Okay. So, any questions for our expert panel? Who wants to kick off? Jonas, please. Can we just get the microphone to
implement Wi-Fi score in clinical practice? I think it's a little bit complicated to use it on a daily basis. Any tips and tricks for that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I use it for patients that I randomize into BEST, and I'll admit that I have not used it outside of the trial. I guess I'm hoping as I get more familiar with it. I'm not a big techie guy or app guy, so I haven't downloaded the app, but I do think it's pretty easy for people that have done that. So conceptually, I think I bought into it, but I haven't. It hasn't translated yet. But I think, I mean, Andrew, I don't know what you think about this. You spent a lot of time developing some of these kind of advances. I think step one is to kind of put it out there as a concept. Step two is to validate it. And step three is somehow get it into practice. There's lots of challenge. We actually had a whole session at our investigators meeting on why people don't follow guidelines. The whole challenge is if people don't necessarily pay attention to clinical trial results and they don't necessarily follow guidelines. So I think that's a big current push in the cardiovascular world, certainly in North America, but maybe that's tomorrow's challenge. But
yeah. I mean, the process of adoption is always slower than you think it's going to be. Matt and Alec talked about the global vascular guidelines on a chronic limb-threatening ischemia. I don't know how many people are familiar with this. We have presented it in a number of meetings, but it's a collaboration between the US Society for Vascular Surgery, SVS, the European Society for Vascular Surgery, and the World Federation of Vascular Societies. And we have a lot of countries, about 69 authors from all around the world, and this will be published, we hope, concurrently in the JVS and European Journal in September. And one of the things we're trying to do is to encourage a more systematic approach to the treatment of CLTI, as we've chosen to call it. And one of those things is trying to really push Wi-Fi, because I think you likened it to the TNM, and I think the previous models were models of pure ischemia that didn't really fit the current patient population. And with regard to the BASIL trials, I think as Gareth says, unless we define very clearly who's in this trial and who isn't, of course we'll get the usual criticism that it's not generalizable to this and that. So if we don't do hemodynamics, we can't Wi-Fi, and if we don't Wi-Fi, I think we'll be out of step with the global community on this. So I think it is quite an important issue, and if we can encourage people to do ankle pressures or toe pressures or whatever you want to do, it would be really helpful. And I fear that if we only have a 50% hemodynamics in BASIL 3, we're going to have a tough time at the end of this. So it would be a shame to go through all this and find that our data are not complete enough to change hearts and minds and improve practice in the way we want to. Any other questions?
So one for Gareth a little bit, as well as the rest of the panel, on the same subject. So Gareth, non-compressibles, are they included in that 50%?
No, that's non-compressibles and non-fans are included.
Okay.
So these are patients with zero data.
Oh, right. Okay. So when we look at our site with toe pressures, we find them particularly a big issue with regards to standardization.
Yeah.
So you can often get one, but whether it's going to be reliable in two different occasions, I just find it so variable that I find it almost pointless in my practice.
Okay.
And our population is so highly aged and diabetic that the vast majority of them seem to be non-compressible at the ankle level, and that's why you get an apathy for ABPI in our area, and therefore trying to give you that data, it it almost seems pointless to us, and that's why waveforms, when we use waveforms to look at in these vessels as part of our standard practice, it seems far better endpoint for us.
Yeah, all of that I accept. We had for a long time problems with toe pressures, and I know that Huntley are here today, but we've not long taken delivery of their toe pressure kit, which we find to be much more reliable than the old stuff that we used to use. It's also considerably cheaper than the old stuff that we used to use, so that's maybe something to look at. We are also collecting the images of all of the patients who are randomised into both BASIL trials, so we will have pictures, if you like, which will be scored, so that we'll be able to define the patients in that respect. But I fully accept everything that you say, and the reasons that it's become less popular now to record ankle pressures, and it's the same in my own unit. I'm not saying that we're any better than anybody else, but if you, even if it's non-compressible, just tick that, and that's counted as a hemodynamic score. So.
Perhaps I could ask Matt and Alec what you think. You don't have to be polite, but compared with what you get in BEST-CLI, a 50% hemodynamics rate is too low, I think. But I wonder what your perspective on that is.
Yeah, I just elbowed Alec after, because we've never looked at that. I don't sense that there's a problem, but we could be just as low as you, if not lower. But so I think we will run home and kind of see how we're doing on that. But we don't typically get pushback on that. I was going to raise the analog of something similar, which is because of our two cohorts in which we have single segment saphenous vein and then non-single segment saphenous vein, we require vein mapping ahead of, or at least vein assessment. It doesn't have to be formal vein mapping before randomization. And that was totally anathema to practice patterns of our cardiology colleagues and radiology colleagues. They just never even conceive of checking the vein. And, to us, us being vascular surgeons, we sort of, I think if that's just another data point, just like the creatinine, and, it's bad care to not know what the vein status is as you're analyzing a CLI patient. But it speaks to the different worlds, and we've been very pleased that they've bought into it, and that's also not been a big problem. But so I think, clearly everyone's working hard, and there's lots of barriers to kind of the flow through of a patient getting randomized, but I think it is an important data point.
So we our definition of CLI actually includes hemodynamics. So to that end, hemodynamics are included. Now, it may be that the ankle pressures are not usable, which is true. It's quite often that they're not usable, and then we rely on either toe pressures or pulse field recordings or transcutaneous oximetry or even Doppler waveforms. So there are other modalities that we rely on. I think the majority of our patients actually do have some form of hemodynamics. I agree with you that I don't think we know about ankle pressures because of the issue with the ankle pressures in patients with tibial disease.
Sure.
But I think it's terribly important. I mean, in my practice, I do that too. At BEST aside, I always confirm, because I've had situations, not infrequently, where I see a consult and there's a wound and there are no pulses, and when I get the non-invasives, they have biphasic Doppler waveforms, and those people I treat conservatively.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's so important. Do we think this is really that I've certainly given some thought to whether we should make it a prerequisite to being randomized.
Yeah.
But that may be overdoing it.
I think we set ourselves up for success in this point because it's, as Alec alluded to, it's part of the definition. So it's not strictly an inclusion or exclusion criteria, but everyone out there that's participating in the trial knows it's, so by definition they have to have CLI, and that's part of our definition of CLI. So it's sort of an inclusion, sort of not, but everyone knows they kind of have to check it.
I mean, what's the feeling amongst people in the room if we were to make it a sine qua non of being considered for the trial that we have to have some kind of hemodynamics? Would that just knock randomization on the head, or do people think that would be a good thing to do? Any thoughts? Some people nodding. No one wants to speak.
It's hard to imagine it will be much of a barrier because it's.
Can we'll just wait for the microphone, would you?
I was saying it's hard to imagine it will be much of a barrier because it's a matter of 5 minutes. Surely somebody can, if you're considering going through all the effort of the follow-up, surely somebody can take 5 minutes to do an ABPI.
Okay.
You would hope so, wouldn't you?
If people don't, could I do a show of hands? So who agrees with that? That in principle we should make it a bit like BEST-CLI. It should be an entry criteria. And who would disagree with that? Okay, so there's a few people who disagree with that, but say 80 or 90% of the people who expressed a view were in favour of that.
It might just be particular to our site, we're from Leeds, but certainly when it came to the Voyager trial, the ABPI was a prerequisite for recruitment into that, and we found it a complete barrier to
Really?
consent because we don't do it as standard when patients come in. Perhaps we should, but we don't. So in terms of getting the patient prior to intervention, to have had the ABPI, it was nearly impossible to do logistically.
Really? Yeah. And can I just ask, I mean, so I don't know how many people you were putting in Voyager, but I guess we're not going to be putting huge numbers of patients in BASIL 2 and BASIL 3. Even for that very small number of patients, it just wasn't possible. I just what was sort of why was that the case? Or in Leeds, I mean, can I ask? I mean, you know, was there just no one to do it? You didn't have the equipment?
I think it was probably to do with the inclusion criteria for Voyager, because you had to have it obviously pre-intervention, and then you had a sort of a 10-day grace period after intervention to start them on trial drug. But for us, as I say, because patients were coming in same day for intervention, we weren't able to see them straight away or so early on before intervention. They had to have a specific ABPI less than 0.8 to be in the trial, so it was all to do with screening and that kind of thing, and it just seemed to be sort of time-wise.
So you were having to do lots of ABPIs to find a patient to randomise, really?
Yeah, some of it might have been our own recruitment strategy, and we fully admit that we didn't approach Voyager perhaps as well as we could have done, but even so, if we found it was just another thing that was a barrier to recruitment.
Yeah. Okay, well that's helpful.
So one of the things that we accept is, and often it's a house officer or a fellow doing a bedside ABI. So I don't know how prevalent that is here, but we do not require it to be a formal vascular lab assessment. The same with our vein mapping. So any duplex assessment will do by an investigator, but I don't know if that'll help or not.
Yeah.
We we never ever ask our vascular lab to do ABPIs in my own centre. It's always done in clinic.
Jonas, please.
I would just promote the two pressure for critical limb ischemia, because that's really measuring the end organ.
Yeah.
I mean, the ankle pressure will actually measure the pressure a decimeter above the ankle. So you're seeing patients with perfect ankle pressure, and then all the occlusion is very distal.
Yeah.
So we use the vascular lab for two pressures, and they're very reproducible from time to time, and it's also easy to evaluate. If you do a pedal bypass, you get the perfusion information. It's pointless to do ankle pressure after a pedal bypass, I think.
Yeah. Hugh.
This is relating to the consent process and Gareth's session really, but also a question that was asked earlier on, and it was about the necessity for a letter to accompany the patient information sheet if it was sent out to the patients. Since that question was asked, Deputy Director Sue Tebbs has snuck into the room, so I'm just going to pick on her and give her the view of the regulatory aspect on that.
Thanks, Hugh. I'm sure John could have answered this just as well as I can, but there is no regulatory requirement in the UK for sending any form of letter with the PIS. In fact, you'd have to have that letter ethically approved before you sent it to the patient to get consent for when they come back. Yeah. So it's just a word of caution.
Yeah. Yes.
There is no regulatory requirement.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you.
May I just say about the change in eligibility criteria?
Yes, of course.
That you were discussing earlier. Have you considered, I wouldn't deem to comment on the science, but have you considered the delays that you would get by having a substantial amendment at this stage?
You mean in terms of doing pressures?
Yeah. If it was formal eligibility criteria, then we'd have to go back for a substantial amendment.
Yeah.
And as you know, that could take a while.
Yes. It's an excellent point, and I'll open it up.
Putting it out there.
Yeah. I mean, we don't want to go back to ethics again, do we?
No, absolutely.
No.
My advice would be stick with what you have if it's working.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, could you give the lady? I can't hear. I'm sorry. Can you just say where you're from, and that we?
Hi, I'm Liz. I'm from St George's. I've only just come on recently to do BASIL 3, and the girl who was doing BASIL 2 before me, and who's just about to leave, so I think I'm going to inherit BASIL 2 as well. She's not been trained ever how to do these pressures, and she's the one who's doing the follow-ups for these patients. So she's not collected any of the pressures, and I think that we were told it was a pragmatic style trial, so that it didn't matter if that wasn't gained. Another situation for me, I've gone on and I've now been trained how to do the pressures, so I'm trying to do them. The first one was non-compressible, so it wasn't very successful. I think if you tried to put that as an inclusion criteria, I think you'd lose a lot of patients, and it would be a major barrier to recruitment. I know it's an important sign.
Even once at baseline.
I think
a bridge too far.
Struggle, because I don't think they're done routinely in all clinics. I don't know if Raj wants to.
There's a lady just in front of you nodding.
Yeah.
Do you want to say anything? Where are you from?
Just that I'm from the Royal White Hospital in Newport.
Right.
I completely concur. I myself have just recently taken lead on BASIL 2 and BASIL 3, and in your position also, I've not been trained. It would be a huge barrier to recruitment. Yes, I completely concur with what you were saying. Yeah.
I mean, I have been trained, so I'm happy to do them now, and I've got someone who can help me if I have any issues. But and also I've had another patient who doesn't want to be followed up and can't get in, and we were told that we're looking at patients who are having amputations, perhaps further on they've got huge transport issues, trying to get in. We're a tertiary referral centre, so some of them come from a long way away, and I questioned that with the study management, and they said that it is a pragmatic study, so just follow up and get the information that you can get. And
I think in follow-up, in an ideal world, we would restage them at every moment, but that's probably impossible. It's just getting a single baseline.
Often as a tertiary referral centre, we don't see them. We see them, fix them, and then give them back to where they come from. So we don't have that follow-up. We don't get to see them again clinically, and so we're just following them up remotely.
Okay.
If that is in that circumstance. So you're not going to get the pressures on those patients. So it's kind of like a.
Can I just make Gareth made a
Have you got the microphone, please?
Sorry, Gareth made a very valid point about generic research nurses. So I'm a generic research nurse, although I'm within the surgical directorate. I have to cover vascular as well as head and neck, colorectal, upper GI, so on and so forth. So Gareth made a really valid point in that it's you do need whoever's within the Vascular Institute to really be hands-on, and I think a lot of centres struggle with that. With the rest of the vascular team, extracting myself as the research nurse, being proactive in being able to contribute to recruitment and follow-up. So.
Okay, thank you. Hoss,
Now, the issue is, I had a run of patients over the past few weeks where the single vessel runoff was the perineal. And obviously measuring the pressures, where most people just do a DP and a PT, and a lot of people don't know how to get a signal from the perineal, and your pressures are going to be low. So I agree, toe pressure is the way forward.
Yeah. Well, I agree. I think in an ideal world we would probably dump ABPI in this population in favour of toe pressures, but if we're struggling to get ankle pressures, I think maybe toe pressures is pie in the sky really. Kim.
Yeah, just a short comment. I agree that we should go for toe pressure when we can, but a lot of our patients don't have any toes when we get to them, so that's a problem. We'll need a third alternative.
Okay. All right. Gareth, were you going to say something? Did you have your...
It's just a local comment really to Hoss that you should have a toe pressure kit in your clinic now. There's a toe pressure kit at every site, so...
Yeah, good. Any questions on... Could I ask about willingness to pay threshold? Because this is something that people get a bit agitated, and it's kind of set at £20,000 per quali. And so where does that figure come from, and why is it that, and why is that the arbiter of cost effective or not cost effective in our healthcare system? Sorry if it's a bit of an unfair
thanks
question.
for that question.
If it's an unanswerable question, then
Yeah, okay, so the figure comes from NICE basically, so they're the ones who decide, so it's different in every country. So for example, in the Republic of Ireland it's 45,000, in France I think it's somewhere between the 30 and the 45.
Is that euros?
So, yeah, so
okay.
it varies. And it's debated constantly about why is it 20 and why isn't it 30 and why isn't it 40 and why is it 100 for some cancer interventions and so I don't have a fast answer for that of it's derived like this this equation, because it isn't.
I mean, when I speak to colleagues from the US, when I start talking about cost effectiveness, they just glaze over usually. And but what's your? I mean, how does this sort of cost effectiveness, cost for quality impact on US healthcare? 18% of GDP, or is it just off limits? It's just not what people want to talk about.
I mean, I think it's not talked about, but I think people are going to have to talk about it.
Okay.
I think that the powers that be are reluctant to talk about it, because by talking about it, you have to confront the realities that exist. And so it's kind of a funny situation.
You do have a bit of it in terms of drugs with Medicare and Medicaid. I mean, they do economic evaluations, so it's not entirely alien, I don't think, in the US system.
There's a tremendous amount of talk about it that, at least for the last decade, has not at all translated into any substantial change. Obviously the current political environment has done nothing to try to sabotage Obamacare, but which was attempting to be a cost-effective system. At our hospital, we have this thing called an accountable care organization, and it's being trialed. It's been trialed for almost a decade, and the whole concept is, instead of the somewhat perverted current system of fee-for-service, where we get rewarded the more we do, and completely incentivized to pile on more care, more expensive care, the system would be very different, where you get a certain amount of money, and it doesn't matter how you spend it. That's your responsibility, your challenge. You're not getting any more money. So the second that switch ever gets made, if it ever does get made, then suddenly qualities, data, evidence-based will rule the world. And there's more and more talk about us going that direction, but we never seem to get there. So.
And CMS have made a decision on drug technologies, is that right? Or is that still pending?
Yeah, as we were talking about yesterday, so they decided not to give any additional money for the drug elution over and above just a regular balloon angioplasty, but it's a kind of a temporary status. So I think it'll be, they opted not to renew the prior increase in amount of compensation, but I think it's up for review again, and the drug companies, I'm sure, or the product companies, I'm sure, are going to fight it. But so I think that's a little bit of an open question. But
okay. Any questions from the audience? Okay, everyone's tired. It's a long day. But I'd just like to thank all of the speakers in the last session, and Benjamin's very excited to give the prize away. Are we ready? Do we have a winner? Oh, come on then. Are you guys all right sitting there? Oh, okay. All right. Okay. The suspense. Okay. Yeah, okay. Sue, do you want to come and do the draw? You've been nominated by my colleagues, or our colleagues here, to do the draw. Because if I do it, people say it's a fix, I'm sure, you know. And it's not FIFA, is it? We want this to be, you know, honest. Oh.
Would you like me to read it out?
Would you? Yes, please. It's like the Oscars.
Absolutely. Elaine Hall.
Well done.
It's got nothing to do with Mr. Twine, it's all yours.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you very much. Thank you. So, just to wrap up, I've got lots of thank yous. Thank you very much to our speakers, and in particular, Jonas and Alec and Matt have travelled a long way to be here today, and I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you've enjoyed it, and the jet lag hasn't been too, and your delayed flight wasn't too bad for you yesterday. And also to thank the other speakers that have contributed so much during the day. I've been very fortunate in my career. I've had the privilege and pleasure of working with many excellent people, and certainly it's been the case with BASIL, and I would just like to say how much I appreciate the support and the hard work that the whole team, the clinical team, Gareth, the research fellows, the research nurses, colleagues at Birmingham Clinical Trials Unit, John, the statistical people. It really is a huge team effort, and I personally only make a very small contribution, really. And I'd just like to thank all of those people formally for doing that, because it's hard work at times, and but we keep going. So thank you very much to those people. And it's hard to pick out, you know, people from that big team, but I think certainly for this meeting, which, as you can imagine, takes an awful lot of organising, I would particularly like to thank Lucy and Benjamin, who are the BASIL 2 and BASIL 3 trial coordinators, because they really have done the lion's share of the work, and I deeply appreciate everything they've done to make today such a big success. So sorry the gift wrapping's not so good, guys, but thank you, Benjamin. Thank you. I'll do that one. Thank you very much for coming. I've personally been very happy with the day. I think we've had a lot of good discussion. I'm very grateful to you for giving of your time, and hopefully the trial has been re-energized as we hoped that it would be. And please go away and recruit some patients, and we can show the world and the NIHR HTA that we can make these trials a big success. Thank you. And have a safe journey home.